Hey guys, it's Coach Barrelline again. We're going to be moving pretty quickly through the next segment, but we talked about last time about how the nation was kind of developing a national identity, but we also talked about the beginnings of these conflicts between different regions of the country. And we're going to talk specifically about the North and the South and how they were different and how these differences start to drive a wedge between the two regions. So it's a very important period in American history. It's going to set up a lot of what we'll talk about in later units about the Civil War and other conflicts between the two regions. So the conflicts are really shaped by the Industrial Revolution and its birth of modern industry and the social changes that went along with it. Well, in this case, we're talking about the first Industrial Revolution. So it began in Great Britain's textile industry, and that textile industry is taking fabrics or fibers like wool or cotton and turning them into cloth or fabric. In the late 1700s, a series of inventions, mechanized spinning and weaving process, which really transformed the textile industry. So the British inventors created these machines that use power from water and later on steam engines to spin and weave cloth. And what this does is it produces large numbers of cloth and it greatly increases the demand for fibers such as wool and specifically cotton. Despite British attempts to keep that technology in Great Britain, by 1793, Samuel Slater and Moses Brown had built a water-powered spinning mill in Rhode Island, and this marks the beginning of the Industrial Revolution in the United States. It spreads rapidly throughout New England, and Lowell, Massachusetts becomes the center for American textile production. There's 40 mill buildings and over 10,000 looms. The majority of those workers were what were called mill girls, young women recruited from local farms, and they made relatively good wages for the time, but worked long hours, as many as 14 hours a day for 6 days a week. Sunday would be their only day off. And these women come to be known as the mill girl or the Lowell girls. So throughout the early 1800s, early and mid 1800s, industrialization spread slowly throughout the United States and other northern industries. In the 1830s, after steam engines become better and more widely available, they really make industry the fastest growing part of the U.S. economy, and just going to take the northern economy to another level. And this work is concentrated into factories. It's going to lead to urbanization. When people leave the farm and move to cities where they can work in jobs in the mills and factories. And as a result, in 1820, only 7% of Americans lived in cities. However, within 30 years, that percentage had doubled. So a massive shift of population is underway here. So within a few decades, the North evolved from a region of small towns and farms into one that included large cities and massive factories. And as more and more finished goods are produced, businesses try to find ways to get their product to consumers more quickly. Roads begin to be developed by the national government. In 1811, you had the national road that was completed 30 years later in 1841, and it stretched from Cumberland, Maryland, all the way to Vandalia, Illinois. And basically, most roads were much shorter and crudely made, kind of done by private funds, a hodgepodge of private funds and local governments. But by 1840, you had the beginnings of a network of roads that connected most of the big cities and towns throughout the United States, which promoted trade and travel and greatly benefited the North more than the South. In addition to roads, you had the completion of many canals in the United States. Probably the largest of those was 363-mile-long Erie Canal, and it connected the Great Lakes with the Hudson River and therefore to the Atlantic Ocean. So what you have is the connecting of the Midwest, or at the time the Northwest, to the Atlantic Ocean and thus to the world. And it was so successful that within 15 years, over 3,000 miles of canals crisscrossed throughout the Northeast, connecting larger bodies of water and increasing trade. Robert Fulton's steamboat is really going to revolutionize transportation. Within a decade of the invention of his boat, dozens of steamboats were puffing up and down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, which greatly increased the traffic of trade throughout the United States. Shortly thereafter, you have the first steam-powered locomotives running in the United States in 1830. By 1840, there's over 3,000 miles of track in the country, mostly in the northern states. So speed, power, and reliability of railroads made it a preferred means of travel and transport. And still, railroads today carry a large percentage of our goods from one place to another across the nation. Technology of the Industrial Revolution also greatly impacted communication. A steam-powered printing press allowed the publishing of even more printed material than before. Postal service developed with the use of the steamboat and the railroad, which created faster mail delivery and more widely available. And of course, in 1840, you had the first patent for a practical telegraph. Samuel F.B. Morse created a practical telegraph machine that could transmit messages from one place to another almost instantaneously. And very quickly, businesses grasp onto this new communication technology. It's really kind of the internet of its day. As I said before, these developments are going to impact the North more so early on than the South. So the South is kind of lag behind technological development. This is going to cause divisions economically and politically down the road. One area in which, however, the South really grabs onto new technology is the invention of Eli Whitney's cotton gin, which solves a problem of separating the seed from the cotton from the fiber, which was an incredibly time-consuming and labor-intensive project. So the cotton gin allowed those things to be separated much easier, which basically increased the ability of cotton to be produced and really leads it to become the major cash crop of the American South. So the Industrial Revolution that had begun in Great Britain's textile factories really latches on to this new ability to process cotton, and it leads to cotton becoming by far the most important economic activity in the South. So the combination of new gin and the increased demand for cotton encouraged many American farmers in the South to grow cotton. Beginning in the 1820s, the number of acres devoted to cotton cultivation soared, and as a result, you had the creation of the Cotton Belt. And this is a nearly uninterrupted band of cotton farms that stretched across the South, all the way from Virginia, more so South Carolina in the east, to Texas in the west. Cotton became so important to the economy and really to political power in the South that it becomes known as King Cotton. Now, cotton is a very labor-intensive agricultural product to grow, even more so than what we're being familiar with tobacco. But the land has to be prepared. Cotton seeds have to be planted. The plants have to be, tended. For instance, chopping cotton, which really doesn't require chopping cotton at all. It's chopping the weeds around the cotton. Now, the crop itself has to be picked. It has to be cleaned, formed into bales. So every step of the process takes an incredible amount of manual labor, and it's very tedious work. And as a result of the demand for cotton increasing, the demand for slaves increases as well. Most of the first cotton farms were run by small farmers that didn't own slaves, but very soon wealthier planters buy up huge tracts of land and begin using enslaved African Americans to cultivate the cotton. And again, the demand for slaves skyrockets after the creation of the cotton gin. So as cotton growers make more money, the number of plantations increases, the size of those plantations increases, and leads directly to an increase in the demand for enslaved African Americans, I should say. And even though the slave trade itself had been banned in 1808, they were routinely smuggled into southern ports from the Caribbean. And these people, and of course the children of enslaved parents, were bought and sold by slave traders to provide workers for the cotton fields. I should also note that in the United States, slaves had much higher rates of natural increase than in the Caribbean islands for a number of reasons. The slave populations grew naturally in the United States more so than they did in the Caribbean as well. So you had a drastic increase in the number of slaves that were needed and trafficked as a result of the growth of the cotton industry. By 1840, the number of enslaved black Americans had risen to 2.5 million. And as cotton farms spread from state to state, as more people got involved in cotton farming, slavery spread along with it. And by this time, blacks accounted for about a third of the population of the American South. And one in every four white families actually owned slaves. Most of those had fairly small amounts of slaves in comparison to the really large plantations. Most had fewer than 20, but still, uh, one in four Southerners owned slaves at this time. So as a result, you have two very different economies emerging in the Industrial Revolutionary period, the first Industrial Revolution, where the South became more agricultural because of technology. Cotton, sugarcane, sugar beets, tobacco, and rice were kind of the main products, specifically cotton and tobacco and rice. But they led the economy of the South. By the 1840, the South, rather than becoming less agricultural through the Industrial Revolution, had actually become more agricultural. In the North, however, although farming had been important since colonial times to the Northern economy, by the Industrial Revolution made manufacturing and trade the base of the Northern economy rather than agriculture. So you really have two different, really different reactions to industrialization in the North and the South. In the North, agriculture becomes less important. In the South, it becomes more important. So some key differences begin to develop between the two regions. In the North, trade and industry encouraged urbanization, and cities grow much more quickly than in the South. Industrial revolution and changes in transportation and communication impacted the North at much higher rates than the South. As well, Northern businesses seized on these new technologies in pursuit of efficiency and growth. They were trying to find a way to do things with less money and less employees. Whereas in the South, there's not much technological progress because most Southern business owners don't see the need for labor saving devices because they have a large population, a large supply of free manual labor in the form of slaves. So you have development of very different viewpoints. In the North, urban dwellers were exposed to lots of different types of people, large immigrant populations, and they tended to view change more from a standpoint of progress. In the South, landscape was less prone to change and population was less diverse. People began to place a higher value on tradition and become suspectful of change. Also, relatively few Southerners had the means or motivation to travel extensively in the North, so very few Northerners ever visited the South, and vice versa. So these two different regions, the people of the regions, never really get to know one another. And of course, the major difference between the two regions is going to be slavery. That's going to be the main sticking point. In the South, slavery was legal, viewed by most white people as an important and vital part of the economy. And many people believed that it was a practice that was sanctioned by Christianity. They were taught a type of religion that excused and even endorsed slavery as the natural order of things. Whereas in the North, slavery was illegal. More and more people viewed it as evil, even. And of course, these differences are fundamental to what will eventually lead to the Civil War. Although it's simplistic to say the Civil War was about slavery, it's also absolutely false to say that it was not about slavery. If you take almost any of the other disagreements that the South and the North had and take them off the table and keep slavery, there's still going to be a Civil War. If you take slavery off the table, it's doubtful that there ever was one. So these differences are going to be monumental moving forward as we continue our discussion of American history. So as we move forward, we're going to be talking about a time of incredible challenge and from a political and economic standpoint, and also the rise of regionalism and sectionalism are going to kind of rear their heads again, and the United States is going to face some pretty dark days of division and discontent moving forward. And a lot of this goes back to the roots of the different ways that each region reacted to industrialization. So we'll talk more about that as we move on. Again, make sure you're watching your videos. You have a quiz on this tomorrow. Talk to you later. Bye.